Having said that, there are some qualities that I think would actually be relevant to an opponent's claim. Let's say your opponent is a chronic liar. You would have good reason to doubt any claim they made, even though the claim may be true. We all remember the story of the boy who cried wolf. I think if someone was a chronic liar, that would be a personal characteristic that would allow you to go after them. The ad hominem in this case may be justified, but whether they're unattractive or mean or graduated from a poor school is irrelevant to their argument. Just as there can be negative attacks or insults against someone that aren't ad hominem arguments, just as there can be negative attacks or insults against someone that aren't ad hominem arguments, there can also be valid or ad hominem arguments that are not fallacies. As well, if the point of criticism of the opponent is either an ethical or a moral violation by someone in a position to enforce moral standards or claims to be ethical, the ad hominem might not be irrelevant to the point at hand. Joseph was a deceiver, lazy, selfish, and believed in a magical worldview. That's an ad hominem, but it's relevant in arguing that Joseph Smith didn't see God. That is, he possessed the characteristics of one who might say that they saw God, but in fact never had. In other words, a liar. How do you confront the ad hominem? Well, theoretically, there's probably no reason for a comeback. If the opponent has to resort to personal attacks, it should be clear that he's got nothing to say about the argument itself. But sadly, the ad hominem attack is very effective. That's why we see it used over and over again in political life. At all costs, though, you should not resort to use your own ad hominems, thereby stooping to your opponent's level. The best you can do is to stay calm and point out the irrelevance of his or her ad hominem attack. If you go to the Fair Mormon site, or whatever they call themselves now, you won't find any discussion or justification of the myriad ad hominems committed by past and present church leaders, and I've given you quite a few. Rather, you'll find a list of ad hominems that they've been able to find offered by apostates and anti-Mormons, as they describe them. This provides us with a perfect segue into our second fallacy, tu quoque.
I wouldn't sell my bike for all the money in the world. Not for $100 billion, million, trillion dollars.
Then you're crazy.
I know you are, but what am I?
You're a nerd.
I know you are, but what am I?
You're an idiot.
I know you are, but what am I?
I know you are, but what am I? I know you are, but what am I? I know you are, but what am I? I know you are, but what am I?
I know you are, but what?
Tu quoque. It's claiming that an argument is flawed by pointing out that the one making the argument is not acting consistently with the claims of the argument. It actually doesn't matter to the truth of the argument if the person making the argument follows his own advice. Again, like all ad hominem arguments, this is simply irrelevant. In the following example, just because the father smokes, it doesn't absolve the son from acting unwisely. The example is, you tell me not to smoke, Dad, but you smoke like a chimney. The logical form is, person A is claiming that Y is true, but person A is acting as if Y were not true, therefore Y must not be true. Example. Famed evangelist Ravi Zacharias engaged in sexual misconduct with female massage therapists. Therefore, it would appear that sexual misconduct is fully acceptable in the evangelical community. Joseph Smith argued strongly against sexual immorality, yet he married and bedded young girls and other men's wives. Therefore, sexual immorality is fully acceptable in Mormonism. Yes, it's true that several of our past prophets made remarks that sound racist, but have you never exhibited behavior that might make you appear to be prejudiced or bigoted? Besides, many people during that time had very similar views. Here's a couple of examples by Mormon apologists. We're accused of being a cult because we have new scripture. Oh, but wait, early Christians brought new scriptures after the time of Jesus. Or here's another one. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints doesn't believe the Bible to be the only and complete Word of God. But wait, neither did the early Christians. In fact, they couldn't agree on an acceptable canon. When I created my website entitled A Letter to an Apostle, I asked the question, is it not dishonest for the church to hang paintings in Mormon chapels, visitor centers, and temples across the globe, as well as reproduce pictures in church books and manuals showing a young, strong-chinned Joseph Smith studiously examining the reformed Egyptian characters on golden plates, when the truth was Smith was bent over with his hat in his lap and his head in his hat? Fair Mormon responded to my site with a rather lengthy 90,000-plus word detailed rebuttal, replete with numerous logical fallacies. In response to this one question, the response was, Fair Mormon's response was not to discuss or refute it, but to accuse me of doing the very same thing. Given that the author complains at one point in his document the church utilizes bogus pictures and hangs misleading paintings, the use of the artwork described below seems hypocritical. He has on his website the image of a Nez Perce war chief riding a tabor, intending to be a mocking reference to the popular ex-Mormon notion that apologists believe that Native Americans rode tabors. The author also uses a photograph of a wolf wearing sheep's clothing. When he talks about Joseph Smith being a false prophet, the author also uses a picture from the 1969 movie Bob and Carol and Ted and Alice, showing two couples in bed together when he discusses Joseph Smith, Emma Smith, William Law, and Jane Law. Well, guilty as charged, but what a classic example of a tu quoque. Fair Mormon makes no attempt to justify the church's use of bogus pictures. Rather, the response is, well, you do it too. In the heretofore example of the father's advice to his son on smoking, the argument was about the deleterious effects of smoking, not about the father's behavior in that regard. The father believes that smoking is unhealthy. The fact that he himself smokes does not in the least affect the truth of his claims. But I suppose, to be honest, you're on shaky ground here. A person's actions speak louder than words. Poisoning the well. The logical form is unfavorable information, be it true or false, about person A is presented. Therefore, any claims that person A makes must be false. Poisoning the well occurs when negative information that is irrelevant is presented ahead of time to discredit the argument. Poisoning the well represents a preemptive ad hominem. It's an attempt to make your claim more acceptable or discount the credibility of your opponent's claim. Sandra Tanner is an evil apostate. Be careful when you meet her. She'll tell you a pack of anti-Mormon lies. Well, I've met Sandra Tanner. I spent an afternoon with her. She's intelligent and a really sweet Christian lady. This fallacy occurs when an argument is made using illogical reasoning. Poisoning the well is a fairly common fallacy. In poisoning the well, negative and irrelevant information is presented ahead of time to discredit an argument. For example, in a political campaign, candidate A presents negative information about candidate B, so that anything that candidate B says will, at least in the minds of many people, be discounted. An example: my opponent, the honorable member from Lancaster, has donated millions of dollars to the oil industry. He has supported oil drilling in protected areas, national parks. Now he's going to come and present his energy plan. Let me remind you, he comes as a wolf in sheep's clothing. In his critique of Jeremy Runnels' CES letter, Brian Hales, a Mormon apologist but nevertheless a credible scholar on polygamy and to a lesser degree Mormon history, attempts to poison the well by suggesting to the reader that Jeremy is not qualified to teach about Mormonism because, unlike himself, he's not a priesthood holder with a testimony. Blogger Cheryl Bruno wrote a recent letter to the editor entitled Emma's Awareness, a response to Brian Hale. In Hale's response to her editorial, rather than sticking to the historical issues, which Hale called pseudo-evidence, he focuses on Cheryl. When a person like Cheryl or me places themselves in front of others as teachers of Joseph Smith's life and doctrines, our personal beliefs become an issue. Why? Because he taught, if ye receive not the Spirit, ye shall not teach. It would appear to me that Hales is attempting to jade the audience against those who disagree with him or his views about Joseph Smith. Those who won't raise Smith to sainthood are not only misguided but foolish, as Hales seems to think Runnels and Bruno are, and therefore have no right to teach anything about Smith. I think Brother Hales is attempting to poison the well. Perhaps Jeremy's writings do not meet high academic standards, but I think it's a mistake to discount the substance of everything that Jeremy has written because of this. Richard Dawkins, an evolutionary biologist and perhaps the foremost expert in his field, says that evolution is true, therefore it's true. The logical form here is, according to person A, who is an expert on issue Y is true, therefore Y is true. It's not a problem justifying a belief by appeal to authority, provided that the authority is an expert on the subject at hand. In our example, Dr. Hawkins certainly knows a great deal about evolution, and he can confidently state that it's true. But that doesn't make it true. What makes it true is the preponderance of evidence for the theory. Appeal to authority is a common type of fallacy, or an argument based on unsound logic. When writers or speakers use appeal to authority, they're claiming that something must be true because it's believed by someone who is said to be an authority on the subject says so. Let me caution you not to confuse deferring to an authority on an issue with an appeal to authority fallacy. Accepting the advice of an authority is a reliable heuristic. The appeal to authority, however, is a fallacy in argumentation. There is always a chance that any authority can be wrong. That's why the critical thinker accepts facts provisionally. It's not unreasonable, nor is it an error in reasoning to accept information as conditional, even when it's presented by credible authorities. Of course, the reasonableness is moderated by the claim being made. How credible, relevant, and important is it? From our very birth, we're taught that obedience to legitimate authority is right and disobedience is wrong. This message comes from our parents, from our teachers, it comes from the judicial system, the military, and of course the church. We learn in the first book of the Bible, as Eve and Adam did, that obedience is required and that disobedience is not only wrong, but it will result in pain and punishment. If we flip ahead a few pages in Genesis, we read the story of Abraham, who was willing to plunge a dagger through the heart of his son Isaac because God, the ultimate authority, ordered it. Surgeons and airline pilots are perhaps at the top of our authorities list, inasmuch as they literally put our lives in their hands. Teachers, police officers, politicians, lawyers, and priests also come up fairly high on the list. That's why very few people believed that smoking was bad for you until the Surgeon General placed notices on cigarette packs. Advertisers and marketers have long understood the power of authority. It's perhaps before your time, but the actor Robert Young was hired as a pitchman for caffeine-free Sanka coffee. These Sanka coffee commercials ran in all kinds of different venues and forms, with Robert Young counseling people against the dangers of caffeine. Why would anyone take actor Robert Young's words for the health consequences about drinking caffeinated coffee? Because he was extremely well known and associated in the minds of the American public as Marcus Welby, MD, a role that he played in the long-running television series. It's hard to imagine it now, but here are some advertisements that appeared in the 40s, 50s, and 60s selling cigarettes. Here's Dr. Oz shilling for one of his products on television. Or Dr. Ho, a Canadian chiropractor who's made a fortune selling electronic medical devices. Mentos, in their cheeky ad, appeals to the ultimate authority. This Jesus seems to like to party. Hospital whites, army greens, priestly blacks, police blues, and other visible indicators that accompany authoritative positions, such as guns, badges, rings, and watches, and expensive cars, all play a part. Titles, too, such as professor, doctor, chairman, reverend, senator, make an instant impression upon those who hear or see them. And of course, in Mormonism, president, elder, prophet. It's interesting, in Matthew, Christ warns people against the use of titles. What is the corporate dress of the apostles? They could be taken for the board of directors at any major corporation. The Relief Society presidency, however, seems to have gotten a different memo. Brighten up. In 1962, coincidentally, at the same time that Adolf Eichmann had been sentenced to death for his role in the Holocaust, Stanley Milgram at Yale University began his groundbreaking studies in obedience. In his original baseline study, Milgram hired 40 male participants to take part in an experiment to examine the effects of authority and punishment on learning. The participants he used were formed into pairs. There were two roles that each of the participants could play. One was the teacher and the other was the learner. The selection process was rigged, however, so that the volunteers would always play the part of the teacher. The learners in every case were Milgram's accomplices. The teacher's task was to test the learner's ability to remember word pairs and, if an error was made, administer an electric shock. Each time an error was made, the teacher was instructed to increase the shock level. The learner and the teachers were seated in separate rooms and communicated through an intercom. The dial on the shocker ranged from 20 volts to 450 volts and was marked from mild shock up to dangerously severe shock. The teacher started at 20 volts and raised at 15 volts each time the learner made a mistake. Up to 75 volts there was little sound, but between 75 and 100 volts, grunts and the occasional sob could be heard. At the 150 mark, you could hear the learner yelling, "Let me out of here!" Milgram, however, told the teachers, "You can't stop now, the learner's being paid." At 300 volts, There was agonizing screaming, crying, and wall pounding. Beyond 330, there was just silence. At this point, the teachers were told that the learner's silence could be interpreted as an incorrect answer and therefore increase the voltage. The teachers didn't know, however, that there was no shocking at all taking place, that the people playing the part of learners were really confederates of Milgrams and were just good actors. The reality was that the teachers were the only subjects in this experiment. The real shocker, though, was that a full 60% of the teachers continued to increase the voltage to the maximum 450 volts. Milgram conducted several follow-up experiments, one in which the learners had let it slip out to the teachers before the experiment began that they had a bad heart. It didn't make any difference. Milgram believed that the events of the Holocaust, where millions of innocent Jews were exterminated by the Nazis, and the My Lai massacre in Vietnam in 1960, where hundreds of unarmed Vietnamese children were slaughtered by American soldiers, were closely related to the behaviors he saw in his experiments. Milgram explained it this way: people behave in one of two operating modes. Either they operate autonomously, in which they make up their own minds and form their own decisions, or they act as agents, one who acts in the place of and by the authority of the authority figure. In other words, when someone is operating in a state of agency, a real transformation takes place within that person. These results are disturbing. These data suggest that civilization, or more specifically, a democratic society, cannot be counted on to insulate its citizens from brutal and inhumane actions and behaviors ordered by a malevolent authority. Let me caution you again, however, not to confuse deferring to an authority on an issue with the appeal to authority fallacy. Accepting the advice of an authority is a reliable heuristic that we all use virtually every day. The appeal to authority fallacy, however, is fallacy in argumentation. There's always a chance that any authority figure can be wrong. That's why the critical thinker accepts facts provisionally. It's not unreasonable, nor is it an error in reasoning, to accept information as purely conditional, even when presented by credible authorities. Of course, the reasonableness is modified by the claim being made, how credible, relevant, and important it is. This statement by Eldon Tanner pretty much says it all. I think it's safe to say that there's no other religion in the world today where obedience plays such a critical and inimitable role than it does in Mormonism. The only other contender is Islam. Islam does not have the administrative structure for sanctions and punishments for non-compliance that the Mormon Church has. The Mormon Church, especially in Utah, is like an ecclesiastic North Korea. The Mormon Church has no shortage of managers in their senior ranks, but very few definitional leaders. Although deeply flawed, Joseph Smith and Brigham Young were leaders. They had energy and enthusiasm, and they had chutzpah and vision, even though their leadership style was hardly Christ-like. The leadership style that the Lord demonstrated was not about command and control, nor status and power. Christ focused on developing the hearts and character of his followers, a persona centered on a servant's heart. He didn't place himself above others. He washed the feet of his apostles and challenged them to follow his example. Those at the top of the Mormon Church today clearly accept the world's conception of leadership, that those who lead are better than those who follow. Dallin Oaks adds to the Mormon mindset as it relates to authority and obedience. Criticism is particularly objectionable when it's directed towards church authorities. It's one thing to depreciate a person who exercises corporate power or even government power. It's quite another thing to criticize or depreciate a person for the performance of an office to which he or she has been called of God. It does not matter that the criticism is true. Russell Nelson got the assist with obedience is a good thing and essential to a successful mission. Obedience brings success, and exact obedience brings miracles. They achieve status because they exercise power over others, leading to rewards, honors, benefits, and preferential treatment for themselves. When a Mormon apostle enters a room, members are instructed to stand. They're very well paid and provided with lavish benefits. I doubt that the Lord would approve. He took the scribes and the Pharisees to task for this type of behavior. I remember a discussion I was involved with the stake presidents and bishops and high priests as we tried to assign seating for the rededication of the Cardston Temple in Alberta. President Hinckley was going to be officiating, and there was a great demand on the part of members to get the very limited seating. I finally suggested that we should give up our seats on the stand to accommodate the elderly and infirm, and we could watch from the tent outside with the rest of the great unwashed. Well, that went over like a lead balloon. These guys were not about to give up the opportunity to rub elbows with the great and the powerful. How do you confront? Request proof of the authority's credentials on the subject under discussion. Is the authority's expertise relevant to the topic at hand? If not, his opinions are just that, opinions, regardless of the fact that he may be a distinguished individual. If the authority figure does indeed have relevant expertise, you can still raise doubts. Does his or her opinion represent the consensus of other experts in the field? Is the expert in the minority? How is the expert viewed by his or her peers? Does the expert have a vested interest in getting people to accept his or her opinions? Perhaps he's misusing his expertise to gain a financial or other personal benefit. Finally, you can demand a second opinion. Another form of the appeal to authority is where the authority in question is not named. Because the authority is not named, it's impossible to confirm the authority as an expert. However, the fallacy is so common it deserves a special mention. This logical fallacy uses an unspecified source as evidence for a claim, commonly indicated by phrases such as, they say that, it's been said that, the experts say, scientists believe that. When someone fails to specify the source of the authority they're quoting, we can't verify the source, thus the credibility of the argument, and therefore there's no reason to accept the claim. The logical form is, person A once heard that X was true, therefore X is true. Appeal to anonymous sources are often a way to fabricate, exaggerate, or misrepresent facts in order to deceive people into accepting your claim. Sometimes this deception is done rather subconsciously. It may not always be deliberate. We meet this kind of argument all the time, though. Eat your broccoli. Everybody knows it's good for you. Post hoc ergo propter hoc. This is Latin, which means so because of this. This fallacy is committed when an argument claims that because one event followed another, it's caused by or analogous to it, even though there's no evidence to support the cause and effect relationship. It's implying that because two events occur together in time, there must be a cause and effect relationship between them. That is, correlation equals cause. Examples. Buffy comes to class just as the bell rings every day. Therefore, Buffy's arrival at class causes the bell to ring. I prayed that I'd find my lost keys, and I found them behind the couch. Therefore, prayer helped me to find my keys. The logical form is A also B. Event A happened, event B happened after A, therefore A caused B.
Not a bear in sight. The bear patrol must be working like a charm.
That's specious reasoning, Dad.
Thank you, honey.
By your logic, I could claim that this rock keeps tigers away.
Oh, how does it work?
It doesn't work.
Uh-huh.
It's just a stupid rock.
Uh-huh.
But I don't see any tigers around here, do you?
Lisa, I want to buy your rock.
The cum hoc ergo proctor hoc fallacy is similar to the post hoc ergo proctor hoc fallacy. In this case, when two events happen at the same time, we jump to the conclusion about causation based on the correlation between the two events. The one event did not necessarily cause the other event to happen. The two events may still be related, but a more thorough investigation is necessary to determine which causes which. Example, hospitals are full of sick people, therefore hospitals make people sick. All claims of divine intercession rely on this fallacy, from priesthood blessings to claims of answered prayers, and of course Moroni's promise. That one event follows another does not establish the former is the cause of the latter. Confirmation bias certainly plays a role in interpreting what is an answer to a prayer and what is not. This fallacy can also be called the fallacy of false cause, arguing that cessation indicates causation. Our hockey team was losing until I bought new shoes. Joseph Smith made prophecies which came true, so he was a prophet. He also made many, many more that didn't come true. Donald Trump was first elected to office in 2016. The U.S. economy grew by 4 million jobs in 2017. Therefore, Donald Trump was responsible for 4 million new jobs. With all the sets of data in the world, if you look long enough, you're going to find some coincidental correlations. Look at this one. This is the correlation between the number of people who drowned by falling into a swimming pool and films in which Nicolas Cage appeared. Well, this data suggests we've got to do something about Nicolas Cage. Here's another alarming correlation. It's the per capita cheese consumption against the number of people who died after becoming tangled in their bed sheets. But it's not all bad news. This is an encouraging correlation because it shows that as the per capita consumption of margarine decreases in Maine, so does the divorce rate. I'm Irish, and my dear mother, God rest her soul, had a superstitious expression for almost every common occurrence. A knife to the floor, a man to the door. If a scissors falls on the floor, you'll get a disappointment. If your nose is itchy, it's a sign that someone is speaking ill of you. If your right ear is hot, it's a sign that someone will scold you. When the donkey brays, it's a sign that the tinker's dead. Well, I didn't hear this one too much. There weren't too many donkeys around when I was growing up. Mormon archaeologists and church apologists are always on the alert for anything, however, that might show a causal relationship between some find and the validity of the Book of Mormon. Case in point, all the hoopla over the discovery in Yemen of a rock or an altar with the 3 letters NHM on them. That was it, 3 letters, NHM. I think the church leaders encourage members to believe that virtually all life's experiences, both positive and negative, are indicative of God's plan. An example of this can be seen in Dallin Oak's April 2016 talk, in which he almost proudly announces,
"He does not prevent all disasters, but he does answer our prayers, as he did with the uniquely powerful cyclone that threatened to prevent the dedication of the temple in Fiji. Or he does blunt their effects, as he did with the terrorist bombing that took so many lives in the Brussels airport, but only injured our 4 missionaries."
Of all the logical fallacies, amphiboly is the most fun, and maybe a good one for us to end on here today. It's from the Greek, irregular speech, and it's pronounced amphiboly. Amphiboly is usually so recognizable that it's rarely used in real-life situations to make a claim seem stronger than it really is. Instead, it more often leads to humorous misunderstandings and confusions. The logical form is, claim X is made. Y is concluded based on an ambiguous understanding of X. Groucho Marx said about his trip to Africa, "Last night I shot a lion in my pajamas. How he got into them, I'll never know." The inadvertent wordplay can result in outrageous misunderstandings, but they tickle our sense of humor. Teachers strike idle kids. Lawyers give poor legal advice. Prostitutes appeal to Pope. Dr. Ruth to talk about sex with newspaper editors. Burglar gets 9 months in violin case. Marijuana issues sent to joint committee. Juvenile court to try shooting defendant. Autos kill 110 people a day. Let's resolve to do better. A few more examples. Don't let worry kill you. Let the church help. 8 new choir robes are currently needed due to the addition of several new members and to the deterioration of some old ones. For those of you who have children and don't know it, we have a nursery next to the Relief Society room. Sister Smith remains in hospital and needs blood donors for more transfusions. She's also having trouble sleeping and requests tapes of President Nelson's talks. Thursday evening, there'll be a meeting of the Little Mothers Club. All members wishing to become Little Mothers should meet with the bishop after sacrament. Brother White will deliver his last talk as stake president, after which the choir will sing, "Now Let Us Rejoice." Sometimes it's just misspelling. Please excuse Jeff from seminary this week. He has a cold and can't breathe well. Or sorry, Sister Jarvis, Helen won't be able to make the temple trip today. She's in bed with Gramps.